Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started in 1 minute. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a chance to grab something to eat, stretch your legs. We are going to be looking at a couple of extremely interesting mechanical claims. So we have two lawyers joining us today from Harrison Pensa. The first is Andrew Graham. Andrew is a co-managing partner at Harrison Pensa. His practice primarily focuses on insurance defense and subrogation. He has a broad commercial and insurance litigation practice, pursuing claims across Ontario for a range of clients in fire, flood, automobile, and defective product claims. He also represents individuals who have sustained injuries through accidents or the negligence of others. Andrew is an experienced trial lawyer who has appeared at all levels of Ontario courts and various administrative tribunals. With him is Tatiana Goulon, who is an associate and litigation lawyer in the Insurance Defense and Subrogation Group at Harrison Pensa, with a primary focus on pursuing subrogated claims resulting from fire, flood, automobile, and defective product claims. Her other areas of practice include insurance defense, negligence, and general litigation matters. She has appeared before the Ontario Superior Court of Justice and small claims courts. And for more general cause, we have Michelle Bradley. Michelle is a mechanical engineer as well as a certified fire and explosion and vehicle fire investigator. She has over 20 years of experience and has conducted more than 2,000 forensic investigations. Her specialties include vehicle fire investigation, equipment fire and failure investigations, failure analysis, product liability, and residential and commercial appliances. So I'm going to just hand things over to Andrew now, and he's going to get us started.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks to everyone for attending today. Thanks to Mark and his whole team for putting this together. It's a great idea for a topic, and always a pleasure to present with Michelle. Michelle and I have had many interesting claims together over the years, so as we were brainstorming what would be good topics for this presentation, we had a number to choose from, so hopefully everyone will find this interesting. Just to follow up on what Mark said there, Tatiana and I work at Harrison Pensa. We're based out of London, Ontario. It's about 200 people that work in our office, about 60 lawyers and 140 support staff. We have a large subrogation presence across Canada. So since COVID, we've been doing claims right across Canada, and the move to a virtual environment has made that much more efficient. As I'm presenting today, if you have any follow-up questions, or if something that we're talking about sparks your memory on a question or a file, please don't hesitate to reach out. Tatiana or I would be happy to speak about any of your files. Lawyers have kind of a bad reputation that anytime you call us, that we're on the clock and that we're charging you. It's probably a well-earned reputation as well. But for us, that's not the case. We give free opinions for any subro files, so feel free to reach out to us if you want to just kick a question around for us, or if something we say impacts one of your files and you'd like to get some advice, we'd be happy to chat about them. We like talking about subro claims and the potential for recovery. And with that, I'm going to jump right into the case that I'm going to be talking about. This is a 2015 Porsche 918 Spyder Hybrid that's valued at around $1 million. The purchase price, or the sale price, was actually $918,000. There was only 918 of them that existed in the world. And after our case, there was only 917 of them left. If you're looking at this car, you're probably thinking one of two things. You're probably thinking that's a beautiful sports car or an incredible waste of money, or you may be thinking both. I'm not a car person, so I look at this and think how unnecessary this is. And if you see what happens to the car here in a few minutes, you may share that view. Only 5 of these cars were sold to Canadians, including the one to the pseudo celebrity that is the subject of this case. It's important that there's only 918 of them sold, because when we get into the investigation of what happened with the car, there wasn't a lot of exemplars available or a lot of opportunity to try to dig into if there'd been other issues with these cars, because there's so few of them. So here's what happens. The vehicle is 3 weeks old when the owner pulls into the gas station for a simple fill-up. He walks away from the car while pumping gas with the engine running. Never a good idea. Gas overflows and a fire breaks out. So there's a video here. Now I'll warn everyone that this is gas station surveillance footage. It's from 9 years ago and it's at night, so the quality isn't great, but it gives you at least kind of a rough idea of what went wrong here. You can see a fire starting in the area of where the gas would be pumped, and the fire spreads quickly. So you can now see it moving toward the middle of the vehicle, all within a few seconds, and the vehicle is in bad shape. This is the vehicle aftermath, and you can see that there's no coming back from what happened. There's no fixing this car and no replacing it, because they aren't making any more of them. So we now have a $1 million claim for a loss of vehicle. We have the gas station, which was significantly damaged, and we have a personal injury claim stemming from both the injuries, minor injuries that were sustained by the driver, as well as the emotional damage of watching his prized possession go up in flames. So basically what we have is a giant litigation mess with multiple plaintiffs and multiple defendants. So lots to try to sort through here. This gives you another view of the incident, and you can see the car is obviously demolished, but there's also a lot of damage to the gas pumps. The station was out of service for some time, so there was a business interruption claim. Lots of different facets to this problem. So when you first look at this case, you think, well, that's fairly straightforward. Everyone knows, terrible idea to leave your car running while fueling, and everyone knows that you don't walk away from your car while fueling, even if you have turned the car off. But what you should get when that happens is maybe some fuel on your shoes, or a little bit on your pants, a bit of an overspill, but you wouldn't expect your car to catch fire like this. Now, one of the twists in this case was that the owner, being more worried about gasoline getting on the side of the car and the damage that might cause to his shiny exterior, grabbed a squeegee and squeegees off the side of the car where the gasoline has gone on, and in doing so actually spreads the gasoline much further than it might have gone otherwise. So when you combine the car running and the engine running and the squeegee and him walking away, you kind of come to the fairly simple conclusion that this is a case of carelessness by the owner, and he's the author of his own demise. Interesting though, there's much more to it, and this is where we bring in the experts. So Origin and Cause got involved in this case, and a great deal of credit to Michelle and her team, an engaged expert at an early stage from a litigation perspective and from the lawyer's perspective makes all the difference in a case like this. They jumped in with multiple different theories of what could happen, what might have caused this, and didn't just take it on face value that the owner was at fault. One of the other reasons this is really important, and I'll digress for a moment to talk about joint and several liability, is in our suburb world, we're always looking for targets. So if you have a party that is at least 1% liable for the loss, they become joint and severally responsible with all of the other defendants. So this comes up in a lot of scenarios where we have a target that may have clear liability but wouldn't have assets for recovery. So then we start to look to secondary targets that may have that 1% liability. Even if they're just found 1% responsible, they become responsible for the entirety of the damages. They then have the ability to claim back against other defendants, which may have more responsibility, but the burden, the obligation to recover from others goes to the defendant, not to us. So it's a huge advantage in subrogated claims. You just need a target with 1% liability. If anybody has that, you'll recover from that party, assuming they have assets. And it again goes to the importance of having an engaged expert at the beginning so they can point out any possible targets and who may be responsible. So we begin collaborating right off the start with origin and cause on this case. And when we're brainstorming on a subrogation case, we kind of go from the basic grade school theory of no bad ideas and let's eliminate everything. So start out with arson. So anytime in a fire loss case, we're always looking at arson and trying to see, is there something that is mysterious or unusual? To follow the theme of the presentations, there's something strange about this fire that is unexplained and may raise an eyebrow. Here we have the great benefit of having the CCTV footage. So is it possible that a stranger or someone else was just out of view and may have thought it was a good idea to commit an arson on this beautiful car? Not possible. We can see from the footage that that's not what happened. So a great head start for here. We can completely eliminate arson as a candidate for the fire. Next, we looked at static electricity. So was it possible that something being carried by the motorist ignited gas vapor? So this was actually a theory that was being put forward by one of the defendants. Looked at that, not impossible, but extremely unlikely. And in the civil litigation world, we're always working on a balance of probabilities. More likely than not, 51%. What is likely? So static electricity, from our view, was a very unlikely occurrence and not something that we were really worried about. Things got more interesting when we looked at a potential design flaw for the vehicle. So obviously cars should not just burst into flames. There's something here that has gone wrong. So we dug into vehicles with similar designs or similar patterns of how they are laid out to see if maybe not this vehicle, because there's so few of them, but maybe another vehicle had similar problems. So origin and cause really dove deep and went through all the different fire records to see if they could find something analogous. We looked at problems with the gas pump nozzle. So again, these pumps should automatically stop when they're full. If you initiate the kind of automatic fill, it should shut off when it reaches that full point. So we're trying to figure out why that didn't happen. And then we wanted to look at maintenance issues with the pump. Had this pump ever had any history of malfunctioning before? It's a gas tank, so it's not something that you would expect would have a problem, but at the same time, you want to dig in and see, is there any history of having issues here? So why I think this case is so interesting and why we thought it would be a good one to present on was there was multiple different issues that led to this catastrophic failure. So no question, right from the start, walking away from your running vehicle while refueling is, and then spreading a squeegee around to try to collect the escape fuel is a a terrible idea. So there's contributory negligence on the driver, and without his actions here, this wouldn't have happened. But as you might have guessed, there's more to the story. So there was a vehicle defect that actually required a recall, and that was a wire harness neck near the fuel tank that had a recall. Now this recall was more focused on other similar types of vehicles because this was such a limited availability car. There wasn't any history of fires with this car, but we were able to find similar cars and find that there was a history of problems with this model of vehicle. And this problem ultimately caused electrical arcing, which ignited the fuel vapors. So that became a huge focus for us, and through a lot of destructive testing, Origin and Cause was able to narrow down the source of the issue and provide some very effective expert evidence on that point. But also more to the story. So the gas pump had overflowed on at least 3 different occasions, and most importantly, the gas station knew about these issues with the pump and hadn't done anything to address it. So that came out through records from the gas station, and it showed that there was these history of issues with the pump, and they had kind of shrugged and thought, well, 3 isn't that many, so we're not going to worry about it. But there was a pattern of issues and something that they should have cut on and had addressed. So it was interesting to get the records from the gas station and see that, and that moved some exposure over to the gas station as well. I think this speaks as well to casting a wide net. So anytime in a sub-road claim, we're looking for any parties with potential liability. We want to get all their records, get everything they have that could be related to the loss and go through it before we make any decisions. Probably didn't seem likely to us that the gas station was at fault after we knew what the driver did and after we knew about the recall on the vehicle, but it's a good example of not making your focus too narrow. So continue to keep an open mind to different ideas, and often when there's catastrophic losses like this, huge losses, it's more than one problem that leads to the issue. So keep your mind open to that possibility. So the gas station had retained a contractor to maintain and inspect the pumps. The pump nozzle was extremely old, should have been replaced, wasn't replaced, and we were able to get an expert to speak to the standard of care of a gas pump maintenance attendant, and the fact that when a pump gets this old, it should have been exchanged out. There's a significant cost to that, but much less than the cost of what was ultimately incurred when we had this loss. I'm going to turn it over to Tatiana to summarize some of the key takeaways from this case.
Thanks, Andrew. So as discussed, this is one of the more interesting and strange cases that we've had, and we're able to learn a lot of lessons from this that we can take into the future. The first of this being that the simplest answer is not always the complete answer. On initial review here, it appeared to be a simple case of carelessness of the vehicle owner. Leaving your vehicle unattended with the engine running while fueling is never a good idea. And while this theory was not incorrect, there were many other parties that played a role in this loss. And without a close eye and the help of our investigators at Origin and Cause, we would not have uncovered these other less obvious issues that ended up leading us to a more successful recovery. Additionally, sometimes there are several layers to the analysis. We are always continuing to evolve our theories and perspectives, and we need to stay open to any new ideas that might come up. As Andrew said earlier, no idea is a bad idea, and it's important for us to take a holistic approach with our analysis. Throughout the litigation process, we often learn additional facts and will receive documents that sometimes will force us to reevaluate our position and we'll need to pivot with our strategies. It was important for us, especially to do this here in order to bring these additional parties to the table. Now, through the investigation, we did learn that multiple parties would share in the liability for this fire. Especially in fire loss cases, it's important for us to consider all potential theories and where that analysis might take us. We need to make sure that we don't get married to one theory. Even in cases like this, where it appears to be relatively straightforward on first review, it's always important to consider other theories and then eventually evolve our strategy going forward. And in doing so, we often look for other targets and other theories. Luckily here, with the close eye of the investigators, we were able to bring additional parties to the table that would not have been there had we focused solely on the carelessness of the driver and the vehicle itself. Our adjuster also played a crucial role here when they decided early on to retain the gas pump. This allowed us to complete testing on this later on in the process and avoid any potential what-ifs. This was crucial in us being confident in the cause of loss and eventually presenting this theory to the opposing parties and the defendants. Through these investigations, we were able to consider the possibility of the gas station and their contractors and maintenance crews, which again brought more parties to the table. We find that with multiple parties with liability exposure, we're able to resolve these files on a more optimal basis. From a settlement perspective, we're able to get more optimal recovery when there are more pockets to dig into. It's far easier to convince 6 different parties to contribute 10 to 15% of a loss than it would be to ask one party to contribute over 60 to 70%, especially with the large cases such as this. And a final and more practical takeaway that we have here is that expensive is not always better. Sometimes it's better to have the reasonably priced and sensible vehicle, such as the Toyota I have parked in my driveway, than one of these rare $1 million vehicles that in the end, if something does happen to them, will have a much more severe impact.
All right, thank you so much, Tatiana. Thank you, Andrew. I think what we're going to do now actually is, because we're splitting this into kind of 2 distinct case studies, if anybody has any questions specific to this, you can go ahead and submit them now. If something comes up later, we can also field at the end, but let's just take a couple minutes here and see if any questions roll in.
While we're waiting, Mark, I'll just emphasize what Tatiana said there in terms of preserving the evidence. The successful recovery, so this case settled at a global mediation. That was only possible because we had all the evidence. If any of the evidence had been eliminated, I think it would have been difficult to achieve any recovery, because there always would have been a hole that the remaining defendants were pointing at and saying, well, if we could investigate this, that may be proving that that was the actual cause. So it's one of the biggest issues Tatiana and I come across when we're working up new subrrow files, is there's good potential if we had all the information, and that's just a good reminder to the people on the ground to preserve everything in the early days, so we can get origin and cause to do their full workup.
Oh, great point. We do have a question here. What was the split in liability over how many defendants?
Sure. Yeah. So it was the Porsche was the primary contributor, then the gas station and the gas station maintenance company that contributed equally as well to a smaller percentage.
Okay, we got 2. I think you just covered these 2 questions as well. Can you summarize who responded to the claim, i.e. gas station owner, pump maintenance contractor, nozzle manufacturer? And, yeah.
I should add there too, Mark. So there was contributory negligence found, not found, it was a negotiated settlement at a private mediation, but there was contributory negligence found on the driver, and there was never really any doubt in our mind that there was some blame that would be on them, both for leaving the engine running and for the squeegee decision, which was ill-fated to say the least.
Actually, that was a question just came in. Yet, was the vehicle owner found contributory? To what degree? I think you just covered that perfectly. And let's go. Yeah, a couple more minutes. Let's just see if anything else comes in. And
if anybody's wondering who it is, I shouldn't say given my involvement, but you are a simple Google search away from more videos of the fire and some more background. So I'll send anyone down that road that is curious. And given our audience, I'm sure we have a lot of curious people.
Michelle, while we're waiting, can I just get you on a sound check? Just make sure we're all set for your portion.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay, so actually, I'm gonna flip things over to Michelle. Thank you again, Andrew. Thank you, Tatiana. If anybody has any more questions about this case study, maybe just kind of add that to the comment, just so we know who you're asking. Okay. Did you get? Oh, there we go.
Are you looking at the right screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you very much to Harrison, Pensa, Andrew, and Tatiana for that amazing presentation. It's also nice to get a different perspective. So when they offer the hour to each of the investigators, we think, there's got to be a better perspective or a different perspective out there. So it's very much appreciated that Andrew has worked with me on more than one occasion to provide a lot of the people here some really interesting information. So I have an incident involving a vehicle that was in a shop, and the fire originated in the engine compartment of the vehicle. It was left unattended overnight in the repair shop, and the vehicle was off at the time. It had just had some work started. They had completed the troubleshooting, and they had identified what the problem was, and they were waiting for a part to come in. So the vehicle was examined first at the lost location in the shop, and I will show you some of those photos later. And that is where the fire occurred. And then again, at a later date, the vehicle was re-examined in a yard where the vehicle had been moved. As most of you are aware, often a preliminary examination of the scene is conducted first in a case like this. And Mike Owens, one of my colleagues, had completed the preliminary examination first and had identified that the fire in the shop had originated within the engine compartment of the vehicle. So he then asked if I would participate in the vehicle portion of the investigation. So once we've identified the various parties that are involved in a case like this, where multiple parties are involved, those parties are placed on notice and a joint exam will occur. In this case, the shop, the vehicle owner, and the vehicle manufacturer had representatives present. And I do mean the shop's insurer and the vehicle owner's insurer. Now, the shop owner also owned the building, so there wasn't a landlord that we needed to include. Now, because the engine compartment was shown to be the area of fire origin with limited spread to the shop, as well as smoke and water damages, the focus of the investigation was on the vehicle. We found out through interviews with the vehicle owner that the vehicle was purchased used. And we also found out that the vehicle came with 2 key fobs with remote starter capability, and it was determined to have been installed at the factory and not an aftermarket installation. So that helped us during the course of identifying parties, if we needed to invite, for example, any dealerships or any previous servicers other than the shop where the vehicle was located at the time. We often try to determine if any aftermarket installations on a vehicle could be responsible for the fire cause so that we can identify the manufacturer of the components that are installed, as well as the parties who had completed the installation of the aftermarket items. So several years after the purchase, the owner, we're still talking about background here, the owner had witnessed a rat leaving the underside of the vehicle while it was parked in his driveway. Approximately 1 month later, the engine light illuminated on the dash. The vehicle was taken to this particular shop for repairs, where the technicians found wires that had been chewed. The repairs were completed and the vehicle was picked up. A few days later, the check engine light turned on again and the vehicle was returned to the shop. After troubleshooting was conducted, it was determined that one of the fuel injectors needed to be replaced. The technician partially disassembled the engine compartment to prepare the vehicle. So the two fuel rails, the intake manifold, were both removed from the top of the engine, and they waited for the new fuel injector to arrive the following day for installation. The employees left the shop for the night around 5 p.m. and the smoke detectors activated around 10:30 p.m. that evening. The fire department responded and witnessed smoke escaping the garage door that was directly in front of the engine of the burning vehicle parked inside. And here you see a snap-on scanning tool was used by the shop on the day of the loss, and it showed that the engine problem was involving a misfiring that was occurring in cylinder 3. First, the ignition coil was tested in cylinder 3 and then the spark plug, and it was finally determined after switching parts around into different cylinders and retesting that the fuel injector in cylinder 3 needed replacement. They didn't have any in stock, so the part was ordered and it would arrive the next morning. According to the manufacturer's procedures for the replacement of a fuel injector, the work did not require that the vehicle 12-volt battery needed to be disconnected, and the hood was left open overnight when they left. They proceeded to close up shop in anticipation of finishing the work the next morning. These photos show the remaining key fob that the vehicle owner had at his home. The people who own this vehicle lived about 1 kilometer from the shop. The key fob used to drive the vehicle into the shop had been left in the vehicle on the dash by the technician who was troubleshooting the problem. This was his normal procedure so that he does not misplace a customer's key fob when working on a customer's vehicle. In this photograph, you can see that the front of the vehicle was facing the north wall. Well, you can't see that it's the north wall, but I am telling you it's the north wall, and the garage door of the shop, and it had not been moved or altered during the preliminary examination prior to the joint destructive examination when all parties were present. So you can see that there is some fire damage to the building as well. You can't see in this case that the severity of the fire damage at the front of the vehicle, but in the next slide you will be able to see that. And then you can see at a high level that there is quite a lot of fire damage and smoke damage and heat damage to a lot of the wiring and other components within the building. And this was a historic building as well. In this photo, or on the slide, you can see that the engine cover and the intake manifold and fuel rails had been removed from the engine prior to the fire during the troubleshooting by the mechanics. They're actually on that cart right beside the vehicle. The fire damage to the front of the vehicle was very severe, as you can see in the photograph. The vehicle and the surrounding area had been cordoned off during the preliminary examination to ensure scene integrity, but to mitigate the loss for the shop, cleanup and repairs had begun as quickly as possible while making sure to not impact the area of fire origin. And so the area of fire origin was defined by the evidence tape that Mike Owens had put up around the vehicle in that area during his preliminary examination. On this cart, you can see that the fuel rails and the engine cover are still located on the cart beside the vehicle. So these, I believe I could see other people's cursors, so I think you can see mine. My cursor is going back and forth. So these two bars are the two fuel rails from the engine, and then this is the underside of the engine cover that had been removed. Now here you can see the fire damage in the engine compartment. You can also see that there's a pattern present on the engine side of the firewall. So the firewall is typically this bulkhead, and it goes down below what we can see in the photograph, and it separates the engine compartment from the passenger compartment or from the inside of the dash. So there we can actually see a pattern right here, which was very interesting to us at the very beginning of the investigation, because we thought, why is there a pattern over there when we have a vehicle that is parked and off? And typically we would only be looking for an electrically started fire, and we did not have any live electrical conductors located back in that area. So the loss of material and patterns on the remaining metal surfaces in the engine compartment showed that this was definitely an engine compartment fire. Considering that the vehicle had been parked for several hours before the fire started, hot surface ignition of a flammable liquid or its vapor cloud was eliminated as a possible fire cause, and that left the vehicle's electrical system as the only reasonable fire cause. We were also able to eliminate an intentionally set fire because we found out that video surveillance and an alarm system were utilized in the building. So further examination of the passenger compartment showed that the fire had spread from the engine compartment into the passenger compartment and consumed much of the dash. So you can see the driver's side dash is here, and on this side we've got the passenger side dash, and a lot of the combustible material over on this side has been consumed, and we're left with metal. Lower in the dash area near the footwell, so down in this area, and I'm going to show some more photographs later in this presentation. On the left side of the driver footwell, the remains of a body control module were discovered. This is part of the vehicle electrical system that we needed to account for, document, and examine for evidence of failure, despite knowing that the fire did not originate in the area where it was installed. So as part of documenting and tracing out wiring, when a vehicle has been parked for a long time, typically more than 30 minutes, and we're focused on the electrical system of the vehicle as contributing to the cause of the fire, even though the fire started in the engine compartment, we still have to complete our own scientific method or our methodology, and we need to find the items that are considered to be live all the time. So despite the fact that we have a fire that started in the engine compartment and the body control module is down in the driver's side dash, we still have to find it to see if perhaps there is a failure of the body control module in this area that may have contributed to the cause of the fire in the engine compartment. And just quickly, I've talked about an engine control module and a body control module. Essentially, these are just small computers. They take data from different sensors in the vehicle, and then they send signals and instructions to different systems for the vehicle. Here you can see that the fire has spread on the right side of this slide. It shows the passenger compartment and that the fire had spread from the engine compartment right throughout the passenger compartment, consuming the backs of the two front seats, and it had started to consume the seat bottoms as well. Now this is back into the engine compartment. The intake manifold and fuel rails had been removed by the mechanics prior to the fire as part of the troubleshooting and repair processes. The ignition coils and spark plugs were still installed in the engine. So here we can actually see, so here are 1, 2, 3 ignition coils. This is a V6 engine. And over here we have 1, 2, 3 ignition coil on the other side. And this where you can see the feet, my feet are, that is at the front of the vehicle. I'm standing at the front of the vehicle photographing the top of the engine. So during an investigation into a vehicle fire, where the vehicle has been parked and off for more than 30 minutes, as was the case with this fire, we focused our investigation on the vehicle electrical system to see if there was evidence of an electrical failure that might be considered a reasonable fire cause. Thank you, Neil. The primary electrical wiring that is considered to be live at all times was examined for evidence of a failure that might have caused the vehicle to ignite. there was no evidence of an arcing failure throughout the entire live electrical system that might have contributed to the fire ignition scenario. So as fire investigators, our job is to determine two things. Essentially, I'm going to break this down a little bit more, but we're trying to determine the origin first, always, and then we are determining the cause of the fire. When determining the cause of the fire, we need to identify the ignition source and the first fuel ignited. If we have those two, we need to then explain the ignition scenario so that we understand what happened in order to provide an ignition source to the first fuel ignited. So after completing our examination and documentation of the primary wiring, and so that is the wiring in the engine compartment that is live all the time, even if the vehicle's off. These are wires, and you can see some of these large cables. These wires are live at all times because they are connected directly to the battery, and there are a lot more wiring harnesses and other wires in a vehicle that are not energized when a vehicle is off. But when typically when a fire starts in a vehicle, and if we can eliminate that it's not an intentional act, then we are looking at the primary wiring or wiring that is live when the vehicle is in the off position. So again, we could find no evidence of an arcing failure that might have caused this fire to occur. Now here's the engine control module. I could have put an arrow here, but here I'll put my cursor over this so that you can see it. And that is, again, one of the small computers in the vehicle that sends instructions to the vehicle for a variety of reasons. In this particular module, it is receiving information and helping the engine run. It is the engine control module. So it was located further forward of the battery and a little bit further forward of the power distribution center or the fuse panel. The wires connecting the vehicle to the ECM, engine control module, were very brittle, and they fractured when the ECM was handled. So after we completed our first joint destructive examination of the vehicle while we were at the shop, we placed the ECM in the vehicle for retention because we were retaining the vehicle after it was being moved out of the shop. We found no evidence of catastrophic failure of the ECM, either on the exterior of the housing, and we didn't open it up at that point because we did want to try and do some research first to see potentially as well if we were going to perhaps x-ray this to see if we saw any evidence of a failure. Now the ECM's internal components were in reasonably good condition. However, there was too much damage sustained to be able to isolate a possible electrical malfunction of the ECM. So the ECM can electrically malfunction and cause something to go wrong in the vehicle, or there could be an actual failure inside that housing that might have caused a fire. We could eliminate the second because the housing was still intact. So if a failure had occurred within this box and then spread from this box, from this module, we would not have had such an intact housing. Now the body control module, so this photograph is taken down in the driver footwell, and this circuit board shows the remains of the body control module. It was located and documented under the driver dash during the joint destructive examination. The BCM, body control module, I'll call it a BCM, it was found to be severely fire damaged, making it difficult to determine if a failure of the BCM was present. Now, the next slide I'm going to show you has the video footage that we were eventually able to review to see the fire starting while the vehicle and shop were unattended. Now, before I press play, I'll show you that the vehicle is back here and the camera is closer to where the office was located. Now, I want you to watch closely and see if you can notice a sequence of events that occur. I'll play this video for you a few times so you can try to find the interesting detail. And I apologize in advance, try not to get motion sickness. This wasn't a clip from the actual surveillance system. It is a video of the playing video using a cell phone because that was easier. So you'll notice some movement. Now, we do have the actual footage, but this was easier for me to use for the purposes of this presentation due to size. So let me press play. And remember that I will play this a couple of times because I want you guys to pay attention to the sequence of events. And you're watching the car. We know already that the fire started at the car. So I'm going to press play. All right, there we go. So the fire is in the engine compartment at the front here. So I'm going to press pause, bring this all the way back. I'm going to press play again and watch again very carefully. Okay, so you now see, I wish there was a way for me to have this be interactive, and I don't really know.
Well, somebody did, oh, yeah, I see a couple people.
Oh, okay, well, what are they saying?
Well, we've got the lights come on at the back, rear light. You can see the tail lights turning on before the flames.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
brake lights, yep.
Yes, exactly. So you'll actually see that the taillights illuminate prior to the fire erupting in the engine compartment. And there's not a very small flame that grows and grows and grows. It is the rapid acceleration of a flammable vapor cloud in the engine compartment. But prior to that, you do see the taillights illuminating.
We've got a couple people mentioning the key fob and the remote starter as well.
Okay. So I'm going to find in my notes where I am. Okay, so now that we have a better idea of the cause of the fire, we needed to figure out how in the world this happened. So you could see in the video that there were two significant events. The very first change in the scene is the illumination of the lights at the rear of the vehicle, which you guys witnessed and you caught on to that. That was great. And then immediately after that, we see that the vehicle seems to start itself and a fire engulfs the engine compartment almost right away. There we go. Now, there were no reported problems with starting the vehicle. However, the vehicle owner indicated that over the last few years, the trunk had opened on its own without anyone knowingly pressing the button on the key fob to release the trunk latch. And when I say the trunk had opened on its own, he ended up indicating to us that it happened about 12 times. So twice the trunk had opened by itself and while the vehicle was being driven at the time, and the other times the vehicle was found in the driveway with the trunk wide open. The owner investigated the cause of this occurrence on the internet and found a forum that suggested always having the vehicle locked. Once he started locking the vehicle when it was parked, he never discovered the trunk open again. So we did a recall and TSB, or Technical Service Bulletin search. We found no fire-causing recalls published online for Transport Canada, NHTSA, which is the American version of Transport Canada, or on Mitchell 1, oh geez, there's one other system that we used to use, but Mitchell 1 or ProDemand is the system that we use now. And what that provides us is access to a lot of procedures as well that a technician would follow, for example, if changing out a fuel injector. So a hood switch also, during our research, we discovered was installed on this vehicle at the factory. So when the hood is in the open position, the vehicle cannot be remotely started using a key fob or by using the mobile app. So that means it keeps the technician safe so that if the technician is working on the vehicle, and let's say the customer is waiting in the waiting room and has the second set of keys in her purse or in his pocket and moves in such a way as to try and remotely start the vehicle, even though the technician has one fob and they have the other one and it can still reach. With the hood switch, if the hood is open and the technician's in there working, an accidental starting of the vehicle can't occur. Now, the owners of the vehicle indicated that they did not use the app at all. They had never downloaded it on their phones and were at home at the time of the fire. So the accidental starting of the engine using the second key fob at home was eliminated as a potential cause of the engine starting. Furthermore, because the check engine light was illuminated and codes were being generated, the key fob or remote start system in general would not have been able to work. So what happened? So the ignition sequence witnessed in the video showed the turn signal lights flashing prior to ignition, and this again suggested that a part of the system was still working. If there was a failure in either the body control module or the engine control module that instructed the ignition system to energize and start the engine directly and not through the remote starting system, the same conditions that apply to the remote start using the key fob or app would not necessarily apply. Because we witnessed the taillights flash immediately before the engine starts, we were able to isolate that this sequence of events only occurs when the remote start system is utilized to start the engine, and not when someone is sitting in the driver's seat and presses the start button. So if you sit in the driver's seat and you go to start the vehicle, the taillights don't flash. It's only when you use a remote starting system. So we were at least able to identify that we are not looking now just at a failure of the vehicle in terms of perhaps an arcing failure that short-circuited the starter and forced the starter to start. We're instead looking for something that has to do with the remote key starting system. Because we were able to eliminate the accidental pressing of the start button on the key fob at home, because the vehicle owners were too far away and they'd never used the app before, the problem was determined to be within the vehicle itself. Now, the remote vehicle start sequence for this vehicle involves the body control module receiving a signal from the fob for remote vehicle start request. Certain conditions must be met, and the body control module verifies the following for system ready. And so you can see that there are a bunch of things, there are a bunch of requirements that the body control module has to, these conditions must be met in order for the body control module to then send the system, send the instructions to the ignition system to start. Now, it is possible that the body control module experienced an internal failure because the hood was thought to be in the open position. Now, it's not perfectly clear in the video if the hood is open or closed, but whether the hood was opened or closed, the engine attempted to start itself regardless of the hood position, and that implies a failure either in the body control module or engine control module. So after the body control module verifies that the conditions are met, it then sends a message to the ECM, the engine control module, and then that will start the engine, but only if it receives a valid signal. The engine control module will cut fuel to the engine during the remote engine running if any of the following occur. So the engine control module, after it starts, if any of the list on the right-hand side occurs, then the engine control module will stop fuel and just say, we need to shut this down because this is not okay. In this particular case, we are not as concerned about whether the ECM cut fuel to the engine as we are about the body control module sending the signal to start the sequence. This implied that a failure of the body control module located in the driver footwell was the most likely cause of the engine attempting to start. So what happened? The fuel rails and the fuel injectors had been removed from the engine, but the high pressure fuel pump was still present. And so there are two fuel pumps typically on every vehicle. One is in the actual fuel tank, and that is a primary fuel pump. And that pumps fuel at a low pressure from the tank up to the high pressure fuel pump that is located in the engine compartment. That high pressure fuel pump then will provide a tremendous amount of pressure to the fuel as it then feeds the fuel injectors. So part of the starting sequence would also energize the starter solenoid and motor, as well as the spark plugs, which were still installed in the engine with the fuel injectors. the fuel was pushed into the engine compartment by both of the fuel pumps, and then it vaporized and was ignited immediately by a spark generated by either the starter, the alternator, or a spark plug. And that wraps up my presentation. Let's see the time. That's not bad.
That's perfect. Thank you, Michelle.
My pleasure.
If anybody has any questions for Michelle or Andrew or Tatiana, now would be the time. And kudos to Rob and Neil for guessing what happened before Michelle got to the conclusion.
I will take this time just while you're gathering some questions to point out how excited we are to announce that we've got a new email address extension now. So I know that most of you who've worked with anyone from Origin and Cause have always thought like, geez, that is just such a mouthful when we're trying to tell people what our email addresses are, but we do have new ones now. So it is the same beginning, and then it's at ocig.com. So the old one will continue to work, but I just thought it was pretty exciting that we had a new shorter one.
Okay, so we do have some questions.
Okay.
So how long of a process was the investigation to verify the cause of loss?
So I think within a few days, we were probably all lined up to be at the vehicle, which was still in the building. So the first step, of course, always is the preliminary investigation determines the parties that have to be notified. And then the sooner the adjuster is able to get those letters out. And typically fire investigators will have contacts. So for example, for vehicles and equipment, there are a lot of contacts that I already have. And so I can help to speed up the process and expedite the retention of an expert for a vehicle manufacturer. In this case too, the other party was the vehicle owner and the shop, and they were notified of this almost that day. So we were able to get down there very quickly so that we could conduct the first joint destructive examination. And then it was after a while, like after we had determined what happened and reviewed the video showing what had happened, we then met up later at the vehicle so that we could try and better understand using the engine control module and body control modules what actually happened with those. And so, but that there was a long period of time between those two when all the parties and legal counsel for all of the different parties were trying to determine whether the next step was required or not.
Okay. How
Mark,
did?
sorry to interrupt, Mark. I was just
Nope.
going to add, one of the questions we get a lot in these scenarios is, what is reasonable notice? So in this case, helping Michelle get people on notice, we would send a letter. If you don't get a response, you always just want to be able to justify to a judge one day in the future the efforts you made to notify a party and the reasonableness of it. And it's not a bright line test, but you don't want to be in a position where you send one letter to a mailing address, then you go ahead with destructive testing, then you hear a month later that we would have liked to participate, but the letter was lost in the mail. So we always try to kind of use common sense to figure out, like, you know, if we're dealing with Ford, there's a way to get a hold of someone at Ford, whether we send them a letter and they respond or not.
Right. So typically a lot of investigators will have contacts as well, in particular with vehicle manufacturers, where we will sometimes kind of give them a heads up. We'll give them the VIN and let them know that something is coming down the pipe, and they'll reach out to their legal department and say, hey, you should be receiving a letter from so-and-so in the next day or two. And we're usually able to let them know how pressing the matter is. So in a case like this, where we wanted the vehicle to be left, so a vehicle in a garage fire, a vehicle in a building, anything like that, we usually let people know. We do a bit of a blast. So I will always provide, and a lot of people I know will provide to the clients, here's the email address that you need to send a letter of notification to. If we don't have an email address, some manufacturers use a fax number, and then other ones, it's just, you can only get a letter to them by mail, in which case then I always encourage them to send it by some method of tracking where it has to be signed so that they can show that it was received by the intended recipient for a notification letter.
Okay, so I've got one question. Well, a couple more. I'm going to kind of wrap them into one for Michelle. So, how did the BCM malfunction, or how did the fob go into start mode? And basically, was the fob involved at all in feeding the signal to the BCM?
We don't think the fob was installed. We don't think that the fob was the failure. We think that the body control module malfunctioned in some way, but because the damage to the body control module was so severe, we couldn't, for example, identify that, oh, look, we've got one tiny little connection here that looks like a, for example, something had short-circuited internally. So we were able to identify what happened, and we were not able to identify visually what the actual failure mechanism was, only that we know what it involved.
Okay, yeah, I think that wrapped up both of those. And then question for Andrew, because Andrew, you were on this case as well, correct?
I was, yeah, that's right.
Okay, so given that the cause appears to be a faulty BCM, was the vehicle manufacturer sued for damage to the vehicle and garage building?
They were, yeah, they were, and that wouldn't have been possible without Michelle's investigation, but that did lead us down that path.
Okay, for Michelle, how much building damage resulted, and do you know if the building was sprinklered?
I don't think the building was sprinklered, and I think that that had something to do with it being a heritage building. And there was not a lot of fire damage to the building. I know they were able to save the building, but there was a lot of smoke damage, heat damage, and a lot of cleanup needed to happen. So in terms of quantifying how much, I actually don't know that. Andrew might be able to say, but I don't know that we even have that answer.
It was a large six-figure claim, and what we often find in these claims is just what Michelle said, not so much the fire damage, but the smoke damage.
And water.
Yeah, water and smoke, especially when the fire department comes through, almost everything's a write-off. So the building itself, from memory, I believe, was retained, but almost everything else had to be discarded.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think that was that. Yeah, that's all the questions. If anybody has anything else that they want to submit, if anything could just kind of pops in your head later on, you can still type them in and we can follow up. But that concludes this session. Thank you to Michelle. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Tatiana. Those were two extremely interesting case studies. We're going to take a now, say, 8-minute break, and we'll be back at 2:20. Is that right? Yes. Okay, perfect. We'll be doing we'll get some structural claims next. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.